All right, so this week we're going to be covering data structures part 2. Last week, you'll recall we started on data structures talking about sets. We'll be talking about some different data structures this week. All right, so just a quick recap of what data structures are. Data structure is a means for storing and organizing a collection of data values. Generally, data structures are composed of primitive data types such as strings, booleans, and numeric data types, but they can include other data structures nested within them. And each has their own set of methods or a defined action that can be performed on the data structure. Methods are called on a data structure using the dot notation. So what we see here is if we had a data structure stored in a variable called data underscore structure, and then we wanted to call a method on that data structure, we put a dot between the data structure and the method. And then we put the parentheses after the method name. The parentheses are where any parameters would go if that data structure accepts any parameters, or if that method accepts any parameters. Not all methods do accept parameters, but regardless, the parentheses are going to be required. And there are many different kinds of data structures. Each have their own relative benefits and uses. Sets we covered last week. There are also tuples, arrays and lists, dictionaries, objects, and even more. And just a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. I really like how that works. That way, we can just pause at the end of each slide and I can just check the chat and see if anyone has any questions and answer whatever's posted there. Cool. All right, so we're going to start out talking about arrays. So arrays are an ordered collection of non-unique values that are all of a specific type, and they are mutable. So a lot of people will, when talking about Python, will consider arrays and lists to be the same thing. There's actually a whole package in Python around arrays, and the arrays are slightly different in that they have a specified type. But we'll dive more into that later. And I just want you to be aware that arrays exist. You're really not going to use them all that often. Chances are you'll be using lists in most cases, because unless you really need to enforce a data type within the collection, there's not really a whole lot of a reason to use an array over a list in Python. So first off, arrays are ordered. The elements within an array have a defined order, so the order in which you enter them is the order in which they will remain. So in this particular case, I create an array. So I call the array function here. The first thing I pass in is an indicator of what the type of that array is. Here I'm passing an I, which indicates that everything within the array is going to be an integer. And then as the second argument, I'm passing a list here. This is actually a list, just something wrapped in square brackets is a list on its own. Arrays have, they have a function that you have to call. But here you'll see that I enter 3, 2, 1, 5, 7, 6, 8, 0, 9. And when it's echoed back to me in the Python console, I get the same exact order that I entered above. So the order is maintained. They're also non-unique. So arrays contain non-unique values. So unlike a set, you can have multiple of the same value in an array. So in this array here, I entered 4 1s, 4 2s, 3 3s, 2 4s, 2 5s, and a 6. And you'll see that in the echoed back response here, we have a number of, the multiples were maintained. So we still have 4 1s, 4 2s, 3 3s, 2 4s, 2 5s, and 1 6. I remember with sets, you could only have one unique value per set. So that's a key difference here between arrays and sets. So specified type. When creating an array, you must specify the type of the elements within the array, and all elements in the array must match that specified type. So again, up here where I entered the I, the string I as the first argument, that was indicating the type of the array and saying that all the elements within that array are going to be integers. So they have a specified type. And then they're also mutable. You can alter the values of the elements in an array. So in this particular case down here, I'm creating a variable called my array, and I'm assigning it an array with the values 3, 2, 1, 5, 7, 6, 8, 0, 9. And then I'm echoing back my array, and we see that value here. And then I can actually replace the elements of that array using indexing. So the way I can index the array is by adding the square brackets after my variable name. So I have my array, and then I have these square brackets after. And within that, I'm adding an index value. So in Python, and in most programming languages, R is an exception if you know anything about R. But in most programming languages, they are 0 indexed. So that means the first element in the array has the index 0. The second element in the array has the index 1. The third has the index 2, and so on. So here I want to replace the first value in my array with a 0. So I get the first, I grab the first element's index, which is 0, and then I use our assignment operator to give it the value 0. And now when I have the Python console echo my array back to me, you'll see that the 3 has been replaced with a 0. So you can change the values of an array, they're mutable, and the way you would reference the values in the array is using indexing. And again, arrays are 0 indexed. So this element here has index 0, this element here has index 1, this element here is index 2, etc. through the array. All right, not seeing any questions in the chat, so just going to keep chugging along. But again, if you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. All right, so another thing to note about arrays, and I mentioned this on the previous slide, is they're not built into Python, so they need to be imported. We'll talk more about packages later in the course. Just for now, if you ever want to use an array specifically instead of a list for whatever reason, the way what you'll have to do is you'll have to first import array into your file. So here you'll notice it's on line 1. You always want to put your imports at the top of your file. So here I'm saying from the array package import splat, and what that basically means here is that I'm importing every bit of functionality from the array package into my file here. So and then a little more on accessing individual elements. Elements of an array can be accessed via their index value. Arrays are 0 indexed, meaning the first element has index value 0, the second has index value 1, etc. So just again reiterating this is something that is often very confusing to new programmers. So if I create an array here and I just put the values 1 through 10 in my array, and then I grab the element at index 0, you'll see that it's 1, which was the first element in my array. So the first element has index 0. Now I want to grab the second element in my array, so I use the index 1, and that returns 2. So here, basically what I've done is I've created this array that has the numbers correspond to their position within the array. So, first, second, third, fourth, etc. But here you'll see that in order to access those values, you need to use 0 indexing. So while this one's the first element in the array, its index is 0. So very important thing to remember. And so that's why I'm repeating it a number of times. And I know it's a little confusing for people who are new to programming and computer science, but it is a pretty common design pattern. R is the only language off the top of my head that doesn't use 0 indexing, and R is instead 1 indexed. But anyway, you can use this concept of indexing to replace the value of an element with another value, like we saw in the previous slide. Like we saw in the previous slide, basically what I did here is I took this same line of code, my array at index 0 equals 0. And then, so I imagine that line is up here. I forgot to include that in my screenshot. And now you'll see that the value at index 0 is actually 0. Cool. Still no questions in the chat. Cool. So I'm just going to keep moving along. Array methods. So there's append. Append does accept a parameter. So anytime you see me put something in here like append and then val here, this is where the value will go, and that generally means it takes a parameter. So append appends a specified element to the end of an array. So if I take the array that I was working with on the previous slide, and I append, and I want to add the value 11 at the end of the array, I just do dot append. I add 11 into there. So again, just a quick reminder on how to use methods. You take your data structure, you call the method on that data structure using dot notation, and if the method accepts a parameter, you pass the parameter within the parentheses. Parentheses are always going to be required, but if it accepts a parameter, you would pass it within those parentheses. And now when I have the Python console echo my array back to me, you'll see that 11 has now been added to the end of the array. Pop. So pop removes the last element of an array. So if I accidentally appended 11 to that array, and I want to remove just that last element from the array, then I can use pop. So again, with dot notation, I have my array. I call the pop method on my array using dot notation. So my array dot pop, and then I have to add the parentheses after. Pop doesn't accept a parameter, but you still need to include the parentheses because that's how you actually call a method. Otherwise, you would just be creating a reference to the method. Yeah. So now here we have my array echoed back to the console, and you'll see that 11 is no longer in our array here. All right, so next method is insert. Insert takes two parameters. It inserts an element into the list at a specified index. So the first parameter is the value you want to insert. The second parameter is the index in which you want to insert that number. So here, you'll notice up here that I had, oh, okay. So what I did here, and I screwed this up. So this pop should have been down here. So imagine the pop happened later on. Here, what I've done is I'm doing my array.insert 1, 1. So what I'm saying here is I want to insert the value 1 at index 1. So you'll notice here one difference between this screenshot and this screenshot, other than the 11 being popped off, is that 1 has been inserted at index 1. That was because I had called the insert method in between there and just, I guess, did my order of operations incorrectly here for the screenshots in this slide. But anyway, that's what happened here. That's how this 1 ended up at index 1 here. So now what's actually happening here in this array is these are all following, the value actually is the same thing as their index. So 0 is at index 0, 1 is at index 1, 2 is at index 2, etc. Remove is another method that we can use. So remove removes the first occurrence of a specified element from an array. So it does accept a parameter, and that goes in the parentheses. So say I create an array 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. So you'll notice here that I have 2 3s in this array. I have two 1s, 2 2s, and 2 3s in this array. They're just at different positions within the array because remember, arrays are ordered. So I want to remove a 3 from my array. So I call my array dot remove, and then in the parentheses, I add the value that I want to remove from my array, which is 3 in this particular case. And now when I have my array echoed back to the console, you'll see that the first 3 is gone. Again, there were 2 3s in my array when I started out, but the remove only removes the first occurrence of that value from the array. And then index accepts a parameter and it returns the index of the first occurrence of a value in the array. So again, using the same values of my array up here, so it's 1, 2, 4, 3, 2, 1. If I want to know where the value 2 is in my array, I can do my array dot index, and 2 is what I pass as a parameter into there, and it'll return index 1 because the 2 is at index 1. Remember 0 indexing, so 1 is at index 0, 2 is at index 1, and that's why we get a 1 back here. We're getting the index of that first occurrence of the value 2. And again, the first occurrence, because we do have a second 2 in here, but it just returns the index of the first occurrence. All right, let's see questions. So what's the purpose of I? So yeah, as mentioned on the previous slides, the I is the specified type of the array. So arrays and lists are different in Python. So you have to call the array function, and then the string I is the indicator of what the elements in the array are. So here what I'm saying is I want all the elements in my array to be integers, and that's why I passed the I there. So that's the significance of the I there. It's telling us what the type of the array is, and it's an integer type. Is it possible to append, pop, remove an element at any location or by indexing? So for appending, instead of just appending, because append appends it to the end of the array, you would need to use insert if you want to insert it at a specific index or location in the array. So that's where the insert method comes in. So as for popping and removing, so pop always returns the last element of an array, and remove just removes the first occurrence of an array. I believe there are other methods out there for removing a specified index from the array. But again, arrays are less commonly used than lists, so I'm not as familiar with them. I wanted to make the clear distinction that arrays and lists are slightly different in Python. You'll see commonly people will call arrays and lists the same things. They aren't in Python. There's a whole package for arrays, and lists are a separate thing. But yeah, so there's probably another method for removing an element at a specific location or at a specific index. I just don't know it off the top of my head. That's a great thing to check for the resources that'll be at the end of the slides. Highly recommend doing some research into that yourself. And yeah, share it with the class. I'm sure other people are curious about that. But just another reminder, you're not going to use arrays all that often. You'll probably be using lists in most cases, unless you really need to enforce the type of that array. All right, what is val representing? So val is just representing, it's just representing a parameter. So the reason I included it here is just to call out that that this method requires a parameter. So append, you have to pass a parameter into the parentheses here, and whatever you pass in as the parameter, that's the value you want to append, or the value you want inserted, or the value you want removed, or the value you want the index of. So you can think of val as just value, and the reason I put the angled brackets around it is just to represent that that's not an actual variable or an actual number or anything. It's whatever value you want to remove, index, append, insert, whatever it might be. Yeah, so hopefully that helps to clarify things. Please let me know if not. Cool. All right, not seeing any other questions in the chat, so let's keep moving. All right, dictionaries. So dictionaries are an unordered collection of key value pairs where the values are mutable, but keys are not. So it's unordered. Dictionaries have no particular order to them, thus they can't be indexed like an array or list. But they do contain key value pairs. Items of a dictionary are stored in key value pairs. Each item must have a key and a value, and these are separated by a colon. So in this particular case, I'm creating a dictionary here using my squiggly brackets or curly brackets. And I put, the first, so this is a single element in my dictionary. So I have a key, a colon, a value, and then a comma to separate that from my next key value pair, where I have a key 2, colon, value 2, and then a comma to separate my next key value pair, which is key 3, value 3. Something you'll notice here is that we're using the curly brackets here, and you might recognize that that's something that we used for sets as well. Sets also use the curly brackets, but sets and dictionaries are distinct data types. So the thing that really sets sets and dictionaries apart is that a set, the elements in a set are singular. They're not a key value pair like in a dictionary. In a dictionary, the elements are key value pairs. So they can be defined using curly brackets or using the dict constructor function. So we can create, my dictionary equals, these curly brackets. One reason I recommend against doing this approach is because, what I'm doing here when I say my dictionary, it's pretty obvious that this is a dictionary, right? Because I called my variable my dictionary. But if I had some other weird name for it, like students or something like that, people wouldn't know, are these curly brackets indicating that it's a set or a dictionary? So in that case, whenever you're assigning an empty dictionary, what I highly recommend doing is just using the dict constructor. And the way you do that is just your dictionary equals dict, and then the parentheses after it, because that's how you call the constructor, is using the parentheses. Typically when you call a method or a function, you need to have the parentheses after. If you don't include the parentheses, then it's going to end up being just a reference to that constructor or that function or that method or whatever it is. So remember, parentheses are very important for actually calling something. So another thing that I wanted to touch on here is the equality versus the identity operator. So in this case, I've created two empty dictionaries, right? The first one's an empty dictionary, the second one's an empty dictionary. So now I check my dictionary is equal to your dictionary using the equality operator here, the double equal sign. And that returns true because they are both empty dictionaries. So yeah, they are in fact equal to each other. But when I use the identity operator, where I check is like my dictionary is your dictionary, that returns false. And that's because these are two distinct dictionaries in memory of my Python code. So again, you know, that's something that we had touched on in week 2 was that there's a difference between the equality and the identity operators. And this is a great example of what that difference is. It's whether or not they're the actual same thing in the memory of your code. And this is something that burned me a couple times when I was a newer developer, because if I were to, you know, say my dictionary equals this empty dictionary, and then I said your dictionary equals my dictionary, then my dictionary is your dictionary would return true in that specific case. And the thing there is that if I make a modification to my dictionary, it's also going to modify your dictionary in that particular case where I assigned your dictionary equal to my dictionary, and the identity operator returned true for assessing that they have the same identity. So that's why I wanted to call this out. It's something that you will likely run into at some point, where you try to start out with two dictionaries that are about the same, and then you want to modify one but not the other. If you assigned like your dictionary equals my dictionary and then edited my dictionary, it would also edit your dictionary, and that may not be what you're expecting, but that is the behavior that you're going to get. So that's why the identity and the equality operators are really good for understanding whether or not they are the actual whether or not they're actually the same thing in memory. Cool. Not seeing any questions in the chat. Oh, and one other thing I just want to call out. Here I've used my key is a string and my value is a string. That doesn't necessarily need to be the case. Your keys could be like a number or something, and then your values could be like lists or another dictionary or something like that. Just want to call that out real fast. It's not like absolutely required that keys are strings and values are strings. I believe there are more limits on what the keys can be, but the values can be just about anything. Cool. Continuing on, because I don't see any questions in the chat. So dictionaries continued. Instead of indexing, values in a dictionary can be referenced using their keys. So if I created a favorite color dict here, and I say that, my key value pairs are David : blue, and then the second key value pair is John : red, third John or Jane blue, then Jill purple, and Paul green. If I want to know, now this is storing a list of favorite colors. If I want to know David's favorite color, then I can do, then I call the fave color dict, and I use the square brackets again, like we did with the array for indexing, but instead of using an index value, because again, dictionaries are not ordered, I would pass the key that I want to get the value for. So in this particular case, I can do, I put David in the brackets there because I want to know what's David's favorite color, and that returns blue. But a warning here: you want to be careful with using this method of referencing keys, because you'll get an error if you try to reference a non-existent key. So you'll notice that there's no key in here that has the value Jack. If I try to find out Jack's favorite color using my fave color dict, using this bracket notation, we're going to get a key error here, and this is what the traceback looks like, and it'll just say key error Jack. And what that's telling us is Jack, there is no key in that dictionary with the value Jack. So just something to call out. If you'll want to handle that error in the future. We'll get to error handling way later in the course. There's another way that you can reference values in a dictionary, which we'll get to in the methods slide, which won't produce a key error, but just wanted to call that out. Oops. So dictionaries can be nested such that the value of some key or keys in your dictionary is itself a dictionary. So in this particular case, I'm creating a context dict. And my contacts dict, I have David as a key, and then a value for David is a dictionary of more key value pairs. So we've got phone number, email address, address, etc. So now if I want to find out using my contacts dict, I want to find out David's phone number, I would do David as using the bracket notation to get the David key. So that returns this value, that returns this whole dictionary here, this inner dictionary. And then I want to know the phone number from that dictionary. So I append my, I do another set of square brackets, and I use the phone key, and that's going to return the phone number here. So that returns the phone number that was stored in that nested dictionary. So these can be nested. You can also add new key value pairs to a dictionary using the bracket notation. So, up here, I got a key error when I tried to see if Jack was in the dictionary, and Jack wasn't. I got that key error. So, but now I do want to add Jack into the dictionary. So I take my fave color dict, I add the square brackets here, and in that I put Jack's name. And now I use the assignment operator to assign the key Jack the value pink within that dictionary. So now if I look at my fave color dict, we'll see that Jack exists in that dictionary, and the Jack key exists in that dictionary with the value pink. So that's how you can add new key value pairs to a dictionary. All right, so questions in the chat. Is there nested array? So with arrays specifically, you can't nest them, and that's because they have the specified type. So, if you specify, like, if you're specifying the value, the type as an integer, you couldn't nest an array of integers in there because that element of the array of integers wouldn't itself be an integer, so it wouldn't be something that you could nest in that array. When we get to lists, you can nest lists in each other, but it's just not the case with arrays specifically. Again, don't worry too much about arrays. I just wanted you to know that arrays do exist, and they are somewhat distinct from lists. But yeah, great question. All right, not seeing any other questions, so keep chugging along. All right, dictionary methods. So the get method. So for the get method, the first parameter, it can accept two parameters. Only one of them is required. So key is the first parameter, and this one is required. And then there's the default, which is not required. So it returns the value of the entered key if it exists in the dictionary. Otherwise, the default value that's entered, if present, is returned. If no default is given, the value none is returned. So in this particular case, I have my contacts dict, and I want to get the contact information for David. So I do contacts dict dot get, so calling the get method on my contacts dict using dot notation. So contacts dict dot get, and in the parentheses, I pass the key David. So what that'll return is it returns the dictionary that I had entered before. And that was the value for the David key in the contacts dict. But now, say I want to, get the contact information for Jane. But if Jane doesn't exist, I don't want it to return none. I want it to return Jane is not in contacts. And in this particular case, since my contacts dict didn't contain a key for Jane, when I call contacts dict.get Jane, comma, Jane not in contacts, Jane not in contacts is what's returned. I'm gonna ask whoever just came off mute to please go on mute. And if you have a question, if you could enter it in the chat, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Cool. So something to quick note here is that the contacts dict.get David, if for whatever reason that contacts dict didn't contain the key David, instead of returning this whole dictionary here, it would have returned the value none. The value none is like in other languages, there's often a value called null. In Python, it's none. So that's what would have been returned if the David key didn't exist in there. Because I didn't give a default value, that default value is optional. So you don't need to include it there. Then there's the keys method. Keys method doesn't accept a parameter, but it returns a list of all the keys present in your dictionary. So in this particular case, I want to do contactSdict.keys. So again, with dot notation, I take my data structure contactSdict, I call the method keys on that data structure using dot notation, and the parentheses are still required, even though it doesn't require a parameter. And what it returns here is a dict keys object, and it tells me, and within that dict keys object, there's a list of the keys within that dictionary, and the only key in the contactSdict dictionary is David at this point. So values is another method. Values returns a list of all the values present in your dictionary. So in this particular case, I want to do contactSdict.values. So remember, key value pairs, the keys are the part before the colon, the values are the part after the colon. So in this particular case, I do contactSdict.values, and this returns a list, and within that list is the values from the dictionary. And remember, in my contactSdict, the value was another dictionary itself, so that's why we see a dictionary in this list here, in this nested list in there. All right, items is another method we can call. It doesn't accept a parameter, but it returns a list of tuples. See chapter 28 in our book for what a tuple is, representing the key value pairs of your dictionary. So if I do contactSdict.items, so what it first returns is this dict items object. Within that, we have this square bracket, which represents a list, these square brackets here. And then in that, we have a tuple. So the parentheses represent a tuple here. That's what these nested parentheses are. And then the first thing in that tuple is the key. And then the second thing in the tuple is the value. So the key was David, and the value was this dictionary of contact details. So that's how the items method works. All right, let me check the chat. Not seeing any questions. If somebody did have a question that they would rather ask verbally rather than in the chat, go ahead and come off mute. I'll give it 5 or so seconds and you can ask that question. All right, not hearing anybody or seeing any questions in the chat, so just gonna keep moving along. All right, so some additional resources here. You can read up on arrays on this website here, dataflare.training, and learn about the array module. The reason it's not like our W3 Schools website, like most other resources, is because arrays are so rare. So because you can just use a list instead. So that's why. Don't worry too much about arrays. You'll just notice in our book that it does call out, that arrays are distinct from lists. So that's why I wanted to call that out in the slides here. And then for dictionaries, if you want to learn more about them, check out W3 Schools, this link here. And then there are some dictionary exercises that you can check out as well to get some practice with dictionaries. All right. So not seeing any questions in the chat. So it looks like we'll have a good bit of time to go over the assignment today. All right, so for assignment 4, you'll be creating a searchable address book. Your client wants you to build them a searchable address book program, which they can use to determine if they have contact information for someone, and if so, have the program list out all of the possible ways in which the person of interest can be contacted. This program should store an arbitrary collection of contacts. So by arbitrary, I mean it should be any collection of contacts. The reason I'm calling that out is I don't want hard-coded is like, you have, say, the contact David, like I had in my contacts dictionary, and then your code is reliant on that key David. Your code needs to be able to be flexible to whatever the contact added in by the user is, whatever that value is. So build this out yourself with fake contacts. Doesn't need to be real. It can be real if you'd like, but it doesn't need to be. Each contact should have one or more of the following details. So they should have a home phone number and or a mobile phone number and or a work phone number and or a personal email address and or a work email address and or a home address and or a work address. and the name of the individual that the user wants to search for. When run, the program should do the following. First, determine if the entered name exists in the collection of contacts. In the case that the contact does exist, hint here, you're going to want to use some conditionals for this from last week. So in the case that the contact does exist, the program should output contact information found for name of the contact entered. And this is where I'm, again, trying to be really explicit about don't hard code the values that people are looking for. I want to be able to go in, and if you don't have a value in your dictionary for Abraham, I still want the program to work, and I still want it to print out no contact information found for Abraham, or no contact information found for Abraham, or something like that. Hopefully that's clear. So yeah, in the case the contact does exist, the program should output contact information found for the name of the contact entered, and anything that's highlighted here and with the angled brackets around it, these should be substituted with the values from the program. And then the program should then output each of the contact details available for that user in the format. The name of the contact entered can be reached via their contact detail name, for example, home phone number, and then the contact detail value. So this is like you're outputting the key here, and then this is like you're outputting the value. In the case that the contact doesn't exist, the program should output no contact information found for the name of the contact entered. Be sure to ask them for their contact details next time you see them. So now an example here. Say my address book contains the following contacts: David, and the mobile number, work phone number, personal email address, and home address, and then Zofia, and they have a work phone number and a work address. Again, these things are like an and/or possibility, but your code must be able to handle a contact that has all of these. If I were to create a contact that has all of those. So if the name I entered in the program is David, the program would output contact information found for David. David can be reached via their mobile phone number at, and then that value up here. David can be reached via their work phone number at, and then that value here. David can be reached via their personal email address at, and then that value from up here. And then David can be reached via their home address at, and the address that was entered up here. Alternatively, if the name I enter into the program is Zofia, the program would output contact information found for Zofia. Zofia can be reached via their work phone number at, and then this is the same number that I entered up here. And Zofia can be reached via their work address at, and then the work address I entered up here. Finally, if the name I entered into the program is Jonathan, the program would output no contact information found for Jonathan. Be sure to ask them for their contact details next time you see them. Yeah, cool. Hopefully that is clear. Are there any questions on the assignment? I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but. All right, so I'll take that as no questions. So we have some extra time here. And I want to spend this time doing something that is useful for you all. What would be helpful to you? What are some questions that you might have about dictionaries? Because the assignment's going to be centered around dictionaries, and you're not really going to use arrays that much, so I want to focus on dictionaries. What questions do you have about dictionaries that you want to see? All right, let's see. A number of questions just all came in at the same time. So, all right. What about when the contact name doesn't exist in the list? So yeah, if the contact name doesn't exist, this is what we'll want the output to be. So remember, my contacts, my address book only contains David and Zofia. There's no Jonathan in there. So if I enter the name Jonathan into the program, I want the program to output no contact information found for Jonathan. Be sure to ask them for their contact details next time you see them. All right. Let's see. Please, what do you mean we should not hard code on the assignment? So what I mean there is I don't want your code to like rely on a specific name that's entered into it. What I've seen in the past, the reason I call this out is that I've seen in past terms of the course where like someone's code works well, but only for one contact. So they say they had David in there, and instead of when in their print statement, instead of printing contact information found for and then whatever variable the contact name was stored in, they literally just put print contact information found for David. And then if I entered as the contact that I'm looking for, if I entered Zofia in there, it would still say contact information found for David or something like that. I don't want hard coding like that. You need to use variables as much as possible. So like, in the print statement that would produce this line here, this should be a variable. This should be referencing a variable. Same goes with like this value here. This should be referencing the number that's in the dictionary, not some hard-coded number of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. I hope that helps to clarify your question. Yeah, I know that's a little confusing. I'm just, I'm trying to get ahead of giving you feedback like, hey, don't hard code it like that. You need to do it like this, resubmit your assignment. Just trying to get ahead of that and save everybody some time here. All right, off-topic question. Is it possible to print sentences with quotes/quotations? Yeah, it absolutely is. Okay, so if I wanted to print something with quotes in it, remember we're gonna have to, using the wrong keyboard. We're gonna have to do, so say I wanna have a single quote in it. So hello world. So you'll notice here what I did is I put double quotes on the outside here. And then within that string, I put the single quotes. So now when I print that, it includes the single quotes. If I wanted to do a combination of both, then I can do like, so I'll do my single quotes, hello, and then say, I want double quotes here. And then world. So now that's where the triple quotes come in. The triple quotes won't be escaped just by a single double quote there. So that's how you can do that. If I wanted to print something with double quotes, then I would want to use the single quotes on the outside, and then I can do hello world there. So it's just all about the type of quotes that you use on the outside, basically. All right. Do you mind if we start over again if we have time? If we don't have time after going over some other examples, I'd really like to cover examples here. This will be uploaded. This lecture will be uploaded to YouTube, so you can definitely review if you were like late or something, and that's why you want to start over. You can review whatever you missed on YouTube. I would rather spend this time on things that are more beneficial than just starting over. More beneficial to everybody, and especially to the people watching on YouTube. Because yeah, you can always watch again on YouTube. Can you give us some examples regardless on the assignment? Well, I don't want to give you answers to the assignment. So let me see what examples I could give. And then one real fast, while I'm thinking about examples, I'm going to answer this next question. In the last assignment, I kept getting errors whenever I indent my conditional statement. If you can send your code, that'll be more helpful for understanding what the error might be. But my guess is what might be happening is you didn't, what might be happening here is you didn't include your colon after your conditional. So, if you say like, if true, but then you don't include a colon after, now there's a bunch of errors here. You would need like a colon here, and now put some code here. Yeah, so that could be the error, but again, I'll need to actually see your code to get a better understanding of exactly what the error might be. Could also be maybe like over indentation. I don't know. Anyway, so some examples that we can cover that are relevant to the assignment. Let me think here. I don't want to give you an answer to the assignment, so let's see. Let's just say I have a variable, my dict, and in it I'm creating, I have a dictionary. Let's put the first key as greeting, and then the value is hello, and then the next key is object, and the value is desk. And then another key is, oops, comma, another key is trying to think of something that would include a nested dictionary. Let's say assignments. And then in that we'll have assignment 1. So this is a nested dictionary. Assignment 1 is installs. And then assignment 2 is variables. And assignment 3 is conditionals. Cool. So that's so I output my dictionary here. So I have a number of key value pairs here. So if I want to, let's see, now I'm going to create a variable called my key. Say it's the key I'm looking for. So I want to find the variable or the key greeting. So now I can do my dict.get my key, and that'll return hello because that was the value linked to that key. Or I could also use the square bracket notation here. Just the square bracket notation, it'll work. The only problem with it is that if the key doesn't exist, you'll get a key error. So oftentimes the get is better. Something that will be helpful for the assignment is what if what's the Boolean of my dict where the key doesn't exist? .get non-existent. So here I'm trying to get a key that doesn't exist. Oops. So I'm trying to get a key that doesn't exist because this dictionary doesn't have the key non-existent in it. So the Boolean of that, if I hit enter, is false. So hint, hint there, that might be helpful for your assignment, using a conditional for determining whether or not a key exists in your dictionary. Another way I could have done that is by adding a default value here of false, and that returns false. Yeah. And then if I do the bool of a value that does exist, so let's say greeting, or let's just do my val since I have a variable for it, that will return true. My val is not found. Oops, I meant my key. So that returns true. The reason this one returned an error, just for those curious, is because I didn't define, even though I'm using get, you'll notice that this is a name error, not a key error. My val is not a defined variable in this workspace here. So that's why I got a name error there, because my val is not defined. It doesn't have anything to do with the get, it has everything to do with my val. So hopefully that bool stuff is helpful for your assignment. Another thing that might be helpful for the assignment is, say I wanted to know what assignment 2 was using my dictionary. So I can take my dict, and then I can do .get assignments. So what this is going to return is it returns the dictionary of assignments. Now, if I want to get what assignment 2 is, I can chain the .get off of that and do assignment 2, and now we get that assignment 2 was variables. This might also be helpful for your assignment. Cool. Hopefully you all found that beneficial. So I think the problem is how to concatenate string and value in the variable. So use plus. Not sure if that's a question or a response to one of the above things, but yeah, something to call out here is if you're ever doing, if you're ever concatenating a string, like we want to print the temperature outside right now is, so if I try to do, and this is going to be in Fahrenheit, it's cold here right now, 33 Fahrenheit degrees F. If I try to do this, I get a type error because the 33 is an int, not a string. The way I could print that and get it to work is if I do stir, wrap the 33 in a stir there, and what that means is cast it to a string, hit enter, now it actually works. So yeah, I'm not sure if that last problem with concatenating a string and such was a question or more of just a statement. But either way, maybe it's helpful for everyone to see how that works. All right, off-topic question. How should we assign the actual value assigned / stored on an input function to a variable, then use it for conditionals instead of getting / outputting a Boolean from the input function? So we haven't covered functions yet, and I don't want to dive too deep into functions or especially IO here, because what you're getting at is IO. I don't want to confuse people too much, but sure, we can go over an example of that. How should we assign the actual value assigned / stored an input function? So the way you could do that is like user input equals, and please don't worry if this doesn't make sense. You shouldn't be using input right now unless you really understand how it works. We'll talk about the input function in future lectures. But if we do user input equals input, what is your name? Then it's going to ask what is your name, and then I enter David, and now stored in user input is the value David. So if you wanted that to be a Boolean instead, that's actually a little bit problematic, just because any user input is always going to come in as a string, and any string that's not an empty string is always interpreted as true in a Boolean fashion. So we could, if you wanted to put something like user input equals input true or false, then I try to enter false, we'll get user input is a string false. So now if I cast that to a bool, user input, cast that to a bool, it returns true, which may not be expected because I entered value false, but that value false always comes in as a string because user input is always a string. A way you could get around that is then using a conditional with like user. So if user input equals false, then we can assign user input equals the actual Boolean value false. Now user input is in fact false. And if I do the bool user input again, that'll also be false. So hopefully that kind of helps clarify your question. To everybody else who hasn't ever seen the input function before, please don't worry about it right now. That's a more advanced topic, because we'll be covering IO in future lectures. So that means if all input values are true or what? So yeah, essentially, if you're trying to interpret whatever a user input is as a Boolean, it's almost always going to be true. Not always though, because if I instead did my user input equals true or false, equals input true or false here, if I just hit enter and now it's an empty string, user input is an empty string. Empty strings, when cast to a Boolean, are false. So that's false. That's the only way that you can get false from a user input. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, and just once again, please don't worry about the input function right now or any of the stuff that we talked about for maybe the last like 5 minutes here, just because yeah, it's an advanced topic that we haven't covered yet. So you're not expected to know it whatsoever. Cool. Well, we've got only 2 minutes left. Not too sure what else would be helpful for the assignment. So let's just wrap up early and give everybody some like a minute back in their day. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate your time. I hope you all have a great week, and I will see you next Saturday. Oh, it looks like we do have another question. Please, when we are indenting for conditionals, how many spaces do we type? If you're using spaces, generally use 4, but what really matters is just that you be consistent. There's a whole debate between tabs and spaces, actually, but in Python development. So I like tabs. they're easier. Then it keeps everything consistent. But you just need to make sure that your indentation is always consistent. Cool. And Abraham, to your questions about the input function, I highly encourage you to just take some time to research it, or wait until we actually cover user input in lecture down the line. You really don't need to know anything about user input right now. It's not required for any of the assignments. And I'm worried that I'm already confusing all the other people in the class, and these topics are irrelevant to what we're covering right now. Yeah, but please do research it. I think it's valuable information, absolutely valuable information for you. But you don't need to know it right now. Cool. All right, thanks for joining, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend and an awesome upcoming week. I will talk to you next Saturday. Bye.